Hello, my name is Dr. Lester Jowl Lacourt. I'd like to welcome you to this module entitled Good Clinical Practices 101, an Introduction. The Division of Bioresearch Monitoring in the Office of Compliance at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health developed this presentation to give the biomedical device research community a general overview of good clinical practices. This is not intended to be an all-inclusive presentation. The objectives of this presentation are to define good clinical practice, or GCP. We will also outline the goals of GCP and provide a historical framework on how GCP came into being in the conduct of clinical investigations. This module will then outline and explain the various FDA regulations relating to GCP in medical device research. What is good clinical practice? Good clinical practice, as defined by ICH E6, is a standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of clinical trials or studies. It provides assurance that the data and results that are reported are credible and accurate. Therefore, good clinical practice ultimately allows for the generation and collection of quality data. The first picture is a caduceus, which symbolizes medicine and the healing arts. The second picture is a laboratory worker wearing safety goggles who is scrutinizing a fluid-filled beaker. These pictures collectively portray quality and confidence in the medical science, clinical testing, and standard operating procedures that support good clinical practice for the generation of quality data. Besides defining GCP, it would also be helpful at this point to define some other commonly used terms. Clinical investigation, or clinical research, is any experiment that involves a test article and one or more human subjects whose results are intended for submission to the FDA as part of an application for a research or marketing permit. It does not include experiments regarding non-clinical laboratory studies. A clinical investigator, sometimes referred to as a principal investigator, is the individual actually conducting the clinical research under whose immediate direction the test article is administered. Should the investigation be conducted by a team of individuals, he or she is the responsible leader of that team. A human subject refers to an individual who is or becomes a participant in research, either as a recipient of the test article or as a control. A subject may either be a healthy person or a patient. An institutional review board, or IRB, refers to the committee designated by the institution to oversee biomedical research involving human subjects. At the institutional level, this body approves the initiation of clinical investigations and periodically reviews its progress. Why is GCP important? In addition to quality data reporting, GCP provides for the protection of the rights, safety, and confidentiality of human trial subjects. When clinical research is performed following GCP principles, the public can be confident that the trial has also been performed ethically with the protection of human subjects in mind. This picture of outstretched hands coming to rest on one another represents a teamwork approach in assuring the protection of human subjects and a protocol that follows GCP principles. Notice the smaller hand on the right side of the picture. This represents the subject whose vital contribution in clinical research mandates that their well-being and safety come first in the conduct of any clinical investigation. What are the goals of GCP? They are to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of human subjects participating in clinical investigations. With a wide range of different types of research being performed, this provides for a uniform set of rules for the ethical treatment of human subjects. When a study is conducted using GCP, scientific validity is supported in the quality, reliability, and integrity of data derived from the study. In doing so, GCP sets forth standards in the proper conduct of clinical trials. Good clinical practice in research occurs when ethical principles are combined with the collection of quality data. There are 6 documents that have formed the foundations for the ethical conduct of clinical research as we see them today. They are the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, the Belmont Report, ICH GCP, ISO 14155, and the Code of Federal Regulations. Let's talk about how these documents came into being and how they have contributed to the protection of human subjects in research. Where did good clinical practice come from? To answer this, we provide a historical perspective on how GCP developed. The modern history of human subject protection in clinical research starts with the discovery of the atrocities committed by German Nazi physicians in World War II. Some of the atrocities included experimentation with twins, whereby one twin was intentionally exposed to a pathogen and then later autopsied in an attempt to determine natural disease progression. Then serving as a control, the other uninfected twin was sacrificed to compare the differences in disease expression. Although such experiments were deemed ethically reprehensible and inhumane, the judges at the Nuremberg trials had no legal basis to judge the physicians conducting these experiments. The Nuremberg Code of 1947 was created to delineate a set of ethical principles to guide the conduct of future clinical research and prevent such abuses. Some of the principles of the Nuremberg Code include voluntary participation and consent. Nazi researchers did not ask their subjects if they wanted to participate in an experimental trial. Another principle is the right of the subject to withdraw from a study at any time. Again, Nazi physicians did not provide subjects a choice in whether or not to participate. Another principle of the Nuremberg Code is the minimization of risk. The risk to the subject is compared to the anticipated benefits of conducting the research. A study should have a favorable benefit-to-risk ratio in order to be ethically acceptable. The Declaration of Helsinki is considered a living document that adapts to changes with innovations in modern research methods. It was first adopted by the World Medical Assembly in 1964 and continues to undergo revision. Some of the major highlights of the Declaration of Helsinki include ethical standards that the well-being of human subjects should take precedence over the interests of science and society. A respect for persons indicate that autonomous individuals can decide for themselves on whether or not to participate in research. There are provisions protecting the health of subjects and their rights. There are also special protections for vulnerable populations participating in research, such as children, the elderly, and the physically and mentally handicapped. This decorative photo shows a physician using a stethoscope to listen to the heartbeat of a pediatric age patient. The Belmont Report of 1979 also sets forth ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human subjects in research. The three tenets of the Belmont Report are respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Respect for persons incorporates at least two ethical convictions. First, that individuals should be treated as autonomous agents. And second, that persons with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. These convictions give rise to the requirement of informed consent, whereby patients have a right, after full disclosure, to freely decide on whether or not to participate in the research. This is the principle of self-determination. But not all persons are able to make informed decisions on their care due to illness, mental, or physical handicap, disability, age, or some other impairing factor. These vulnerable populations require special protections in clinical trials. In clinical research, beneficence is more than the obligation to do good for the patient, or at the very least, to do no harm, as stated in the Hippocratic Oath. Beneficence also requires the investigator to maximize possible benefits and to minimize possible harm. The third tenet of the Belmont Report is justice. Justice implies fairness in the distribution of labor and its results. This principle applies to the selection of research subjects who share both in the burden and benefits of their research. This decorative photo shows a balanced scale which represents justice. The International Conference on Harmonization, or ICH-GCP, is defined in E6 Good Clinical Practice as an international, ethical, and scientific quality standard for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting trials that involve the participation of human subjects. In international law, harmonization is the process by which different states adopt the same laws. It provides a unified standard to facilitate the mutual acceptance of clinical data by the regulatory authorities of the EU, US, Japan, and other jurisdictions adopting these guidelines. Thus, any country adopting ICH-GCP guidelines would be following the same standard. The objective of ICH-GCP is to achieve greater harmonization in the interpretation and application of technical procedures and standards, improve product quality, and speed time to market by reducing duplication. This would facilitate efficiency in the use of resources and eliminate unnecessary delay in the global development while maintaining safeguards on quality, safety, and efficacy. ICH-GCP thus serves to uphold regulatory obligations to protect public health. In 1997, the FDA endorsed the GCP guidelines developed by ICH. ICH guidelines have been adopted into law in several countries, but used as guidance for the FDA in the form of GCP. ICH-GCP is composed of 13 guiding principles. The first three principles of ICH-GCP are founded on ethical considerations originating from the Declaration of Helsinki. A trial should only be conducted if the anticipated benefits justify the risks. The most important consideration are the rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subject over the interests of science and society. The next two principles involve protocol and science and the importance of sufficient non-clinical and clinical information prior to introducing a product into human subjects. Other principles refer to adherence to a scientifically sound investigational plan or research protocol. The next principles cover responsibilities and informed consent. An appropriately constituted independent ethics committee should review and approve the research. Appropriately qualified clinical investigators should conduct the research, and informed consent should be obtained from all human participants. Compliance with ICH-GCP principles provides public assurance that the rights, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are protected and that clinical trial data are credible. There are assurances protecting subject confidentiality and personal health information. Good manufacturing practice is also applied for the quality control of investigational products. This slide expresses an important distinction in comparing the Declaration of Helsinki with ICH-GCP. The Declaration of Helsinki articulates broad ethical principles as a guide to conducting ethically acceptable clinical research. This is compared to ICH-GCP, which are broader, more prescriptive principles that include ethical as well as scientific operational aspects of clinical trials. Compared to the Declaration, ICH-GCP includes additional scientific guidance on the design, conduct, reporting, and documentation of research investigations. The focus of the Declaration of Helsinki is directed to physicians who are involved in the conduct and design of research studies, while for ICH-GCP, the document is aimed at drug sponsors, investigators, and IRBs. The Declaration of Helsinki obtains input from the World Medical Assembly, which includes representatives from the international medical societies. On the other hand, ICH-GCP obtains input from representatives in industry, public health organizations, and medicine control agencies within each member and observing country with oversight of medical devices. While it's important to differentiate the role of these two documents and their importance as guidance, the specific aspects of what these documents say do not take effect until they are written into regulation. Internationally, ICH-GCP and similar standards have been adopted into many laws and regulations and provide more explicit components to GCP, including the responsibilities of sponsors and investigators, monitoring, auditing, etc. Principles derived from these documents are used as guidance by the FDA to produce research standards prescribed into law in the form of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, or 21 CFR. The International Standards Organization, or ISO, is an international body that promulgates industry standards. ISO 14155 assists sponsors, monitors, and clinical investigators in the design, planning, conduct, and documentation of human subject protections. This standard is widely used in Europe and other countries as a basis for medical device investigations. It also assists different regulatory bodies and the ethics committees in the review of clinical investigations. What constitutes good clinical practice in device research? Research should be conducted in compliance with the approved protocol. With GCP, studies must be reviewed and receive approval from an IRB or Independent Ethics Committee, or IEC, prior to the enrollment of the study subjects. Freely given informed consent should be obtained from every subject prior to the research participation. When a subject is not capable of giving informed consent, the permission of a legally authorized representative should be obtained in accordance with applicable law. The monitoring plan ensures that the trial is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance with the protocol, standard operating procedures, or SOPs, and GCP. Adverse device effects, the equivalent term to drug adverse events, or AEs, or serious adverse events, SAEs, should be reported to the sponsor according to the reporting requirements and within the time periods specified in the protocol. The sponsor must report the results of an evaluation of an unanticipated device effect to the FDA and all reviewing IRBs within 10 working days after the sponsor first receives notice of the adverse effect. Who is responsible for GCP compliance? Any person who is involved in collecting the data throughout the product lifecycle is responsible for GCP compliance. This includes the sponsor of the study, the clinical or principal investigator performing the research, contract research organizations, and independent ethics committees. An institutional review board is a type of independent ethics committee. Other players involved in GCP compliance include clinical research coordinators, clinical research associates, medical monitors, data managers, information technology staff, statisticians, and many others. A subsequent module will explain in more detail some of their specific roles and responsibilities in ensuring GCP compliance. How does FDA articulate or implement good clinical practice for medical devices? FDA's expectations and requirements for GCP are contained in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations and guidance documents. Regulations are required by law, while guidance documents provide insight into the agency's current thinking without being absolute prescriptive requirements. The following regulations articulate GCP and express FDA's expectations for research. Part 11 describes requirements for electronic record keeping and electronic signatures. From a regulatory viewpoint, electronic records are equivalent to paper records and handwritten signatures. However, this electronic format requires that certain controls be maintained to ensure that records are trustworthy and reliable. Part 50 describes requirements for the protection of human subjects. This includes general requirements for informed consent, its elements, and appropriate documentation. This section also provides for the protection of children in clinical investigations not involving greater than minimal risk. Part 54 minimizes investigator bias and conflicts of interest by requiring clinical investigators to disclose potential sources of financial and proprietary interests in the outcome of a clinical study in which he or she is overseeing. Part 56 outlines the scope of responsibility, functions, and operations of the IRB in the review of research investigations. This includes aspects of IRB membership, record keeping, and reporting and administrative actions for noncompliance. Part 812 covers investigational device exemptions, or IDE, which refer to the discovery and development of useful medical devices and allows for the optimum freedom for its development. An approved IDE permits a device that otherwise would be required to comply with a performance standard or to have a pre-market or approval to be shipped lawfully for the purpose of conducting investigations of that device. The regulation also covers the responsibilities of sponsors, IRBs, and investigators, and inspection of investigational records. Part 814 provides procedures for the pre-market approval of medical devices intended for human use. This section specifies pre-market application procedures, including studies conducted outside the United States, FDA actions on PMAs, including timeframes for review of applications. This provision also covers the development of humanitarian use devices, or HUD, which are intended to benefit patients to treat rare conditions afflicting less than 4,000 people in the United States per year. In summary, we have defined good clinical practice and its importance as a common standard in the conduct of ethically and scientifically sound clinical trials. We have outlined the goals of GCP in the protection and safety of clinical research subjects and its role in the generation of quality data. We also provided a brief historical perspective on how GCP arose in the protection of human subjects and how GCP are used in planning future clinical investigations. And finally, we introduced the role of bioresearch monitoring in GCP compliance while outlining some of its regulatory directives in the Code of Federal Regulations for Medical Device Research. For further information on topics discussed here, we welcome you to visit the FDA website and links shown here. I hope you have enjoyed this module on Good Clinical Practices 101, an introduction. Thank you very much for your time and attention.